The Retirement Cafe Podcast, episode 55, 7 lessons learned from interviewing interesting people. Part 1.
Retired or thinking about retirement? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe Podcast. In each episode, we bring you an important conversation with insight, tips and knowledge, all designed to help you live a fulfilling and successful life in retirement. Here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner and accredited later life advisor, Justin King.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe Podcast, which is brought to you by retirement planning specialist MFP Wealth Management. This week we are celebrating the first anniversary of the Retirement Cafe Podcast. Believe it or not, we're on episode 55 and week 52 of the podcast. So I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to look back at the lessons I've learned over that time from some of the fascinating people that I've chatted to. I wasn't too sure what to expect when I set out on this podcast journey. I knew I would be aiming to talk to lots of people about all aspects of retirement life. And it's certainly true that I've chatted to a diverse group of people. As I look back at all the conversations, a number of themes pop up that are central to many of my conversations. So I wanted to take this opportunity, 1 year on from launch, to share the first 3 of 7 lessons I've learned from chatting with interesting guests. Everyone has a story. This is true for all of us. We all have a personal story that has got us to where we are today. But what I found fascinating about the guests we've had on the podcast is how much of an impact their stories have had on the direction their lives have taken. Some of my guests appeared on the podcast with the intention of sharing their personal story, and that's how that shaped their life in retirement. You may remember Nick and Debbie from episode 4, whose tragic loss a few years prior to retirement led Debbie towards getting heavily involved with a charity that's brought true meaning to her retirement. Here's a brief snippet from our conversation.
So it's that feeling of worth and that you're making a contribution to something, which most, we obviously do when we work, but you don't have to do paid work to do that. You can get involved. A lot of what Nick does with these sort of expedition things, it's all charitable. I work 1 day a year, 1 day a week. Nice, isn't it?
It's good retirement, isn't it?
1 day a week on a voluntary basis for a local charity, children's charity and a hospice in events. And I think a lot of it as well is the camaraderie of other people that you miss. I think retirement's nice, but it's mixing with other people as well. I think that's what you miss, and you've found that in the events that you do. I think I've probably found it through Julia's House and getting involved with them and their fundraising events. So it's just finding something that you enjoy, but also it's helping others, making a contribution.
Yeah. So tell me more about Julia's House then. What do they do?
They're they're a Dorset and Wiltshire hospice, children's hospice for children with life-limiting illnesses, or basically they're there. They do help the children, obviously, but it's the families that they support. I think they only get about 6% funding from the government, so everything else is voluntary contributions and fundraising, etc. So I kind of went along there just to see they were advertising for some office admin assistants, and found myself working in the challenge events department, which is really enjoyable, good group of people. But obviously you're seeing and reading and hearing all these things about the challenge events, and the more you get involved, you realise what a valuable job they're doing. So this year I decided that I'd challenge myself. So a friend and I are going to trek the Alps for 3 days, not just us, with another group of people, and fundraising. So it's been, obviously it's going to be great for the funds that everybody raises for Julia's House, but for us as well, we're out there I've never done so much walking, but it's great fun, but it helps the body, it helps the mind. I find it really, really helpful in sort of clearing the mind.
Her husband Nick found himself taking on a very different role when he stopped working full-time, which was equally satisfying and gave him a real sense of purpose.
I don't feel I want to make a commitment where I actually am measurable and I have to earn something, put something on the table at a workplace. Whereas obviously working with a charity side, doing the expeditions, in a way you are doing that because you're responsible for people. You're imparting a lot of knowledge which you forgot you've actually had. And also it's really enjoyable. And it's been with a bunch of guys again, but we all work together. And that's absolutely great fun.
Now, Ken West, MBE, has appeared on the podcast twice over the past year. Firstly, in episode 3, when Ken shared his life story of 45 years working in funeral services. And during that time, Ken improved the burial situation for stillbirths, unchanged since the 1850s, and also for fetal remains. He wrote the Charter for the Bereaved, introduced the reusable coffin for cremation, and created techniques for reducing pollution from cremation. He was quite rightly awarded the MBE for his contribution to funeral services. Now, you might think a lifetime dealing with death would be pretty morbid, but Ken has another passion that almost counterbalances death, and that's fell running. He says you can't feel more alive than you're running, and at 72, Ken has certainly got some miles under his belt, an estimated 65,000, and he's still running today. This snippet from Ken's interview illustrates what an important role running has played throughout his life and continues to do so today.
What the running does, of course, people will sometimes think, oh, you're just infatuated with living longer. No, you're not. You're infatuated with feeling well. It's about waking up in the morning, feeling that, you're alive, looking forward to the day. And if you do a little bit of running like that, when it comes to walking, you can walk all day. The fitness level stays there, and I'm sure that I'm as fit as I was when I was in my 20s, nowhere near as fit as I was when I was in my 40s, when I really reached a peak.
Right.
So I can see different periods in my life when fitness meant different things.
The second lesson I've learned over the past year is the idea that retirement as we know it is dead. It's widely reported that we're all living longer, and this is starting to impact how we view the stage of life traditionally known as retirement. As recently as 2 episodes ago, Sir Muir Gray discussed why he doesn't like using the word retirement and feels that the word renaissance is a much more apt term to use to explain this stage of life. Here's an excerpt from his interview in episode 51 of the Retirement Cafe podcast.
Retirement age, Bismarck picked the first retirement age of 70 in the 1880s. And he picked it knowing the expectation of life was 70. So he could say to his government, well, it's not going to cost us very much, don't worry. And then that's what happened in UK too, and then down to 65. But in those days, 1911 was 65 and 60 was in the Second World War. But in those days, the expectation of life was very short. But now someone aged 60 should assume they're going to live to 90. Not all will,
no.
But the assumption is that people get 30 years in front of them. The assumption is we're going to live for 30 years. And just hoping that if you do nothing, you'll pop off with a nice little heart attack is a great mistake. But also what we're seeing now is that people are recognizing this. And the old world of childhood work and retirement is now changing. I'm sure you've got friends in their 50s who've they've been doing the same job for 30 years, but they're just changing. They're doing something different. Yeah. And sometimes they're taking formal retirement and sometimes they're moving on. So I think we're moving into there's a very good book called The 100-Year Life, and I'd recommend an interview with Linda Grattan. And it's multi-phase life. So the word retirement implies the snail going back into its shell. So that's why I came up with the term renaissance, which is a bit fancy, but it is intended to say it's the start of something as well as being the end of something.
George Lee, co-founder of the social enterprise The Age of No Retirement, is also a believer in changing the way we perceive the retirement stage of life. It's true to say that age defines us. That's how it's always been. But it's a belief system that George is setting out to challenge. In our interview in episode 24, George explains that 86% of people of all ages do not want to be defined by their age, but instead want to hang out with people of different generations. It's our values and our needs and our interests which define us, not our age. Here's a clip from my interview with George, who explains how the age of no retirement came about.
What we did is we brought people from business, from government, national and local, older people, younger people. But what we did is we brought designers into the mix to get people thinking differently around some of the issues to do with age. And over those 2 days, we had about 400 people coming together. And what we didn't know really what was going to come out of it. And what came out of it was about 3,000 ideas. And a lot of energy to think differently around the age issue. So that's where the Age of No Retirement was born. It was born from a real feeling that there has to be a new way of exploring age in a much more positive and optimistic way, looking at the opportunities rather than looking at the negative issues to do with decline, frailty, dementia and loneliness. So that's how it started.
This is a topic we plan to cover in much more detail in the new year with a series on longevity and retirement, so keep listening in for more about that. The third lesson learned is that it's never too late to do something important to you. None of my guests illustrate this better than Ayan Gran. In case you missed episode 26, I highly recommend you take a listen. At the age of 50, Edwina Brocklesby decided to run her first half marathon. Until that point, she'd done a little running. After that event, and following the loss of her husband of 30 years to cancer, she completed a marathon. Now 76 years old, the past 20 years has seen Eddie take part in marathons, triathlons, and Ironman races across the globe, and she has accrued many medals and awards. In her book, Ayan Gran, Eddie explains how she became the UK's oldest woman to complete an iron distance triathlon, and how keeping fit taught her that growing older needn't mean slowing down. Eddie has taken her personal passion for keeping fit into later life and created the charity SilverFit to promote lifelong fitness and fun, raising awareness of the benefits of physical activity and social inclusion for the over 50s. And who better to inspire older adults than Ayan Gran? Here's Eddie explaining the aim of SilverFit.
I think it's healthier, happier aging, and I think absolutely importantly to try and make it fun. You know, I think that word doesn't get used enough, does it? But I think it's the key factor for our aging population. And you know, the greatest cost to the NHS is probably falling over in older people. And I think that if we can help people get their strength up in their muscles and avoid falling over, and also getting out of the house, you know, avoiding the loneliness of aging too, that's really, really important. So we've got very good evidence that, you know, it does make a difference. And so part of our sort of mission would be to campaign to, you know, as an organisation that's run by older people, for older people. I think that's quite a useful one. The one that we started off with, that it's never too late to start and change your lifestyle and, you know, adopt a happier, social and more physically active lifestyle as we age.
The other guest who I feel has always followed her passions in life, moving from one project to the next, is Suzanne Noble. Suzanne appeared in episode 10 and shared her story of now and why she founded Advantages of Age at the age of 50. Advantages of Age' original objective was to challenge the media narrative around aging. But as the social enterprise has grown, Suzanne now wants Advantages of Age to become the go-to organisation for those aged 50 plus, seeking to improve the quality of their lives. Here's Suzanne explaining her story and why it's never too late to start a business.
Starting a business in your 50s was far different than starting a business at any other period of my life. And starting a tech business as an older woman was an enormous challenge. I'd been a very techie kid, and so when the opportunity came to downsize, sell my house, release some equity, and start something new, I thought, okay, I'm going to start an app for Londoners on a budget called Frugal. I'm going to throw myself into the London startup scene. Very quickly discovered that I was pretty much the oldest person in it, which was freaky. And out of that sprung Advantages of Age, because I realized, like, okay, you know, we've still got a lot to give, especially within our careers and doing things that we're passionate about. And I didn't feel that anybody was really supporting that.
Sure. So tell me, what's the real aim of that? I mean, we can check out the website of Advantages of Age, but what's your real aim there with the service that you're providing?
It's changed over the years. We became a social enterprise in late October of last year, and we started off saying we're challenging the media narrative around aging. So the website was really created by myself and a really good friend of mine who's a journalist and does some PR work too. And it really was about trying to convey the benefits of aging. So we curated all the stories that we could find from other trusted sources like the New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, etc. And then we started writing our own content around that. We then, following a grant from the Arts Council, started to get more into events, and we did a few events around that. And then in November of last year, we received a grant from the Paul Hamlin Foundation, which was really around my passion, which was around business. So there really are two parts to what we do. One is very much around the arts and culture side and around the community, which we've got a massive Facebook community of about 3,500 people. And we do events and we organize activities and we just talk about positive things around aging. And the other side, which is much more where I'm focused now, is around the business and that kind of business advice, business support, and trying to navigate this new world that we're living in where older people are really having to work much longer than any other generation probably did.
Sure. So, I mean, I can think, I don't know whether this is true, but I could think that some people that I've spoken to as they get older possibly might think it's, too late to start a business. I've missed my opportunity. I should have taken it earlier. What would your response to that be?
I think what we've seen from the Business Academy that we've run two, we're in the second cohort now of the pilot that we did with the Paul Hamlin Foundation. And I think what we're seeing is that, yes, there are definitely people for whom starting a business is possibly the only option they've got. The industry in which they worked, for instance, journalism, is drying up or has dried up, and there's no longer the opportunities that they once had. So starting a business really isn't so much something that they thought they wanted to do, but something that they have to do. Right. And I've seen that there's a lot of work that goes into creating an entrepreneur. For me, it's something I've been doing virtually my whole life. So adapting to change, just transitioning is something that I'm quite comfortable with, but I'm seeing that that's not the case for everyone. Having said that, there is a basic structure to starting a business, just like anything else. So, you need to know what the business is, who your market is, how you're going to position yourself, where you're going to find your audience, how you're going to finance it. And that really is the same for everybody.
Sure.
So, yeah, I don't think it's ever too late to start a business, providing you've got the right attitude.
Yeah. And I suppose the counter argument to that could be that if you're starting, a business later in life, that you're actually coming with a lot of experience, aren't you? You're coming with maybe a 30-year career in your field, and you've watched a lot of other people make mistakes and therefore will probably have learned from that.
Absolutely. I think the biggest challenge that we're seeing is that these people have this whole bank of experience, but they lack the confidence to execute. So whereas with younger people, they sort of like dive right in. They've got all this enthusiasm and energy, but no skills really, and no experience, but just a huge willingness to kind of like go for it. Whether it's just like, hey, I started an Instagram feed, I invited my 500 friends, and hey, now I've got a business. No idea what it is, right? It's just like an Instagram feed. What we're seeing is a lot more reticence around older people, and that actually what they need to start with is just a huge confidence boost. So a lot of what we do is around confidence and resilience, because once they've got that, then they're like, hey, I'm pretty amazing. Actually, I've got 30 years of experience, and that's worth something.
So, there we have it. The first 3 of 7 lessons I've learned from speaking to some of the fascinating people I've had the privilege to chat to over the past year. Part 2 will be released next Tuesday, so if you've not yet subscribed, you can do so on iTunes or our website or your preferred podcast player, so you can be sure to catch next week's episode. If you'd like to listen to any of the full episodes that I've touched upon today, then head to the show notes at theretirementcafe.co.uk, where you'll find the links to each and every one. As always, if you've enjoyed this episode, then please write a review on iTunes, as it helps more people like you to find us. Thank you once again to MFP Wealth Management for supporting the podcast over the past 12 months, and here's to continue our podcast journey over the next 12 months. So until next time, this is Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Cafe podcast with Justin King. To find out more, you can find us online at theretirementcafe.co.uk.